Hey guys, in this video we're going to discuss a very interesting gambit which is called a Locock Gambit. It happens after moves e4, e5, knight to f3 and d6. So here we enter the Philidor Defense, and after the main move d4, black may respond with the knight to f6, counter-attacking e4 pawn, and here comes very surprising move, knight to g5. At very first glance, it makes no sense at all because nothing is hanging in black's camp, but that is only at first glance. In fact, after h6 move, white may capture the pawn on f7, and that is the main idea behind this move. So what's going on here? If black responds with the king f7, and that's basically forced because after knight f7, both the queen and the rook were attacked, white continues with the d captures e5. Because in this case, we may notice that since the king is no longer on e8, the queen on d8 is now protected, which means that d6 pawn is pinned. So already here, white has two pawns for the minor piece, and at the moment, the knight on f6 is hanging. So black has not so many opportunities here that look at very least promising. For example, if black captures the pawn on e4, then the knight is easily regained after the check on f3. Black has nothing better than just going back to f6. At first glance, it looks not so dangerous because at the moment position is materially equal, but there is a big difference between black and white here because black's king is really vulnerable and white continues with a simple bishop to c4 check. After king goes to e8, let's say there is another check. After queen to e5, white just develops the bishop on e3, and it's clear that white is dominating the field. Look at the development, look at the king on e8, which has no right to castle anymore, and I think the evaluation is crystal clear. So let's get back to the situation when white has just captured the pawn on e5 and try to understand if black has something better than knight captures e4. So here, another possibility may be just to move the knight to the e8 square. And this is not very good. White just continues with a very natural bishop to c4 check. So in general, as you can see, white is trying to play on light squares here because a lot of light squares are weakened. After this check, position is really annoying. For example, bishop e6 will not work because of queen to h5 check. And we can see that it's a big problem now for black to find a good square for king. Something like g6 will be refuted with the help of bishop takes e6, king takes e6, queen captures on g6, starting just to collect the pawns and chasing the king at the same time. For instance, king d7, queen goes to f5, king goes to c6, and now just e6. So white has not only the sufficient compensation, I think this position is simply close to winning. Let's have a look now at the other knight's move after d takes e5. So the right move here is knight to g4, because with the help of this, black manages to solve two problems. First of all, black prevents the queen to h5 check, which may be an important attacking resource for white. And another idea here is that after knight to g4, e5 pawn is hanging, which may force white to make a decision what to do with that pawn, probably exchange it for the one on d6, which will help with the development, or maybe black will simply manage to grab that pawn in the future. White continues with the normal bishop to c4. Now it's important just to get back to e8. Any other square is pretty dangerous. And white may try the e6 move here, breaking the connection between the bishop and the knight. So the knight on g4 is hanging now. And if, for example, black tries something like knight to e5, which looks like an interesting option, attacking the bishop, being ready to meet queen h5 check with the g6 move, white continues with f4. And it's clear that black cannot take the bishop in this situation because of the queen h5. So in this position, the only sensible way to defend the h5 is probably something like h5. But already here, white may consider taking on a5, which is, by the way, not so clear because of black's queen h4 check and then Queen may take on e4, but there is also bishop to d5, just going away, and the knight is heading, so it's a real problem, because if knight goes to g6, white just castles, and look at this position. Yes, black has the nominal advantage in material, but white's pawns are amazing, and black's pieces are not coordinated and not developed. So I believe this position is also very good for white. So instead of moving the knight to e5, black has to jump with the queen to h4. So let's have a look at that option. So right after e6, queen goes to h4, and we can see that pawn f2 is under attack. But what's important, knight is protected, and h5 square is also under control. So white may continue with the g3, and after queen goes to h3, bishop may come back to f1, attacking the queen, trying to get rid of it, but then queen goes to h5. And we can see that in this particular case, black is doing fine, because e6 is under attack, knight is protected, so white doesn't have direct threats, so black has enough time to continue with the development. Let's have a look at the other option that black has after d takes e5. Another knight's move, it is knight after d7. I believe that in that case, the situation is still quite dangerous for black. So another way for black to play here is to put the knight on d7. It doesn't look very convincing to me, because in this case the bishop is limited, so it's hard to continue with the normal development of the queen side. But at very first glance it looks quite logical, because we basically attack the e5, but we don't put the knight on g4, which is quite vulnerable position. Well, white continues with the bishop to c4 check. And here we can see the difference. The king cannot go back to e8 because of queen h5 anymore. So there are only two moves, king to e7 and king to g6. In case of king to g6, white may continue with the e6, which is very strong. And after something like knight to c5, queen jumps to g4, king goes back to h7. Now b4, another super aggressive move, attacking the knight. And feels like black's best option here is to play queen to f6, attacking the rook on a1. And white may opt for queen f5 move. I mean, yes, it is an exchange of queens, but even this ending is not clear to me. So I believe white does have a compensation here, and it's really annoying to play it with black. Although, objectively speaking, if you make the right moves, you should have a slight edge with black here in this position. And if black decides not to go to g6 and instead chooses the e7 square, white gets a real attack. Let's have a look at that one. So in this position, king goes to e7, and white continues with a very simple e takes d6, check, c recaptures on d6, and then the knight goes to c3. So white just continues with the natural development, and we can see that there are so many targets and so many weaknesses in black's camp, it's really hard to survive it. Let's say knight goes to f6, then simply bishop to f4. So purely positional play now. No sacrifices anymore, just developing the pieces, bringing other reserves to the attack, and indeed with so badly placed pieces, it's hard to play this one with black. If instead of knight f6, black decides to develop another knight, for example, knight to c6, then knight just jumps to d5. Look at this beast. And after king to e8, let's say everything is just over after queen to h5. So as you can see, the evaluation is not so clear. I mean, in the majority of lines, white has some dangerous threats. So I would say that after d takes c5, the knight should go to g4. That is probably the best option in case black accepts the gambit. But there is also a solution if you want to avoid all these complications. So let's have a look at it. So right after knight to g5, black is definitely not forced to play h6. So there are two ways to solve the problem. And the one is just to play bishop e7. It's probably the easiest. So in this case, the queen is protected, so knight f7 no longer makes sense. So after d takes c5, in that case, black just recaptures on e5, and black will have an extra minor piece for only just one pawn. It's not enough for sure. And if white continues with the bishop c4 or something, then black just castles and f7 is protected. In this case, though, black should be ready to play this ending. So after d takes e5, d takes e5, and queen takes d8, we can see that king cannot take because f7 is hanging, but bishop d8 is just good enough. We have a symmetrical pawn structure. Everything should be fine here for black. It's the one option. Another option is just to take the pawn on d4. Let's have a look at that one as well. Once again, right after knight to g5, black just captures on d4. And if white continues in the active style with the bishop to c4 attacking f7 pawn, black may try this typical d5. Moreover, it's hard to find any other sensible defense against knight or bishop to f7. After e5 though, it's possible to continue in an active way, bishop to b4, using the fact that pawn is still on d4. Let's check. If white wants to win some tempi, white may try this c3, in which case black continues with the queen e7 check. Again, very annoying. It's important to understand that white cannot trick black with the help of king d2 move, which looks very interesting because now the bishop is hanging and there is also a threat of rook to e1, winning the queen or at least the minor piece, for example. In this case, black continues with simple castling. So there is no longer a problem with rook to e1, and it appears that after c takes b4, queen simply captures on b4 with check, and the bishop is hanging, the king is under attack, so king d3 is the only try to save the bishop on the board, where after black just continues with the bishop f5, and if king takes on d4, then the accurate move rook to e8, controlling the squares on the e file, leads to a quick checkmate, because black's next move may be just a c5, and if it takes the knight c6 checkmate, it's really hard to survive it with such a king in the center. So after queen to e7 check, white should defend the king the other way. Let's have a look at that one as well. For instance, white may try bishop to e2 move, in which case black simply captures on c3, and after something like b takes c3, the bishop just goes back to d6. I think black is completely okay here. Long term, I would say that black has even a slightly better pawn structure here, and there is no problem with the development. There is no problem with the passive pieces anymore, so everything's just fine. So as we can see, knight to g5 may work just well as a surprising weapon if your opponent completely unaware of this and doesn't understand the idea behind knight to g5 and automatically plays h6. So in that case, after knight f7, it's really possible to get some compensation for missing material and get some attack in some lines. But if your opponent takes his or her time to understand the idea behind knight g5, well, the chances are there will be something like bishop e7 or ed4, and you will not get what you want with white pieces. So I would recommend it for, occasional usage in blitz or rapid games, but to be completely honest, it's not so serious. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next videos.